Hello.
Good evening, Mr. Malcolm. How you doing?
I'm well. I'm well. We finally got it together.
Finally, after working on it, uh, it is the right time, the right
What?
circumstances.
Yeah, what a week. This has been something else.
It's come evident that in the recent days, that the current president of the United States uh, priority is not America first. It's obvious that, in my own perspective, that U.S. intelligence and U.S. technology is up for sale, regardless of who that partner is. So I wanted to organize the space with the one and only Malcolm, especially because you have a lot of history working with the Arab Gulf states, and additionally, your experience in the military. Did you see the list I sent you of all the things that were sold to the Saudi government?
No, I'll take a quick look at it right while we get the audience starts coming in to the forum. But every week I do a podcast with Michael Cohen, Donald Trump's former lawyer, and Lev Parnas, his former negotiator for Russia. And it's amazing. They've always accurate about what they say. It's that, and their fundamental thing analysis of Donald Trump is simple. In every circumstance, he must walk away with what appears to be a win, no matter what. Right? It could be a complete disaster. He has to make it look like it's something. So, this deal with the Saudis. There you are. I have your list now. This deal with the Saudis is typical of that.
Absolutely. And it was framed as a benefit to the United States. The technology that's being sold, though, is very sensitive technology that we have only sold to Israel in the past. For example, the F 35s. It has AI technology and some capabilities that we really want to keep away from the Chinese government. And with the recent strong ties between the Saudi government and the Chinese government, it is almost definite that the Chinese government is going to be able to get their hands on the F 35. What is your take on that?
Yeah, as I'm looking over that list, which starts off with the F-35s, um, one, it's not as bad as we think, especially as these are going to be stock base model F-35s, and that technology is about 15 years old. China has their own stealth fighters. They have their own aircraft, fifth generation, fourth, fifth generation aircraft that can match this. The real question is, I mean, and I understand that there's some capabilities that they've excluded that Israel was given that would give Saudi Arabia the capability to, be on parity with Israel, which the Saudi Air Force doesn't need and has never really had, even though they've bought a lot of technology from the United States and Europe over a very, very long time. Uh, Israel's trump card is not the technology; it's the skill of their air force, and and of course, they operate in an asymmetric fashion. They don't just fly an airplane somewhere. They use multidimensional tactics. They have the ability to understand and read your airspace, your radar coverage, because most of it's American, and they can walk between the raindrops, so to speak. And the way that they dominated Iran earlier this year during the attacks on the Iranian nuclear sites, we don't really know how persistent the Israeli Air Force was there. But the fact is that they could fly over active military bases, and the fighters there were ordered not to respond or were not responding to the point where the Israelis could go ahead and just blow up what they wanted as they wanted. Saudi Arabia sort of wants that, but with Saudi Arabia, and I worked in the Gulf states for a good part of my career, over half of my 40 years, and I lived in Abu Dhabi for 10 years, working in government, around government, or and as consultant. And there's just one thing that everyone needs to know when you're talking about how they are dealing with the world. And it always starts with what we amusingly called in Abu Dhabi the Rolex effect. They want whatever you have to look good on their arm, right? That's it could be a completely terrible weapon system. But if you sell it right at, USATRI, or, the Abu Dhabi Defense Expedition, or one of the Saudi ones, and it gets the eye of the sheikh, of Mohammed bin Salman, or the Minister of Defense, or another member of the royal family, then it doesn't matter what the cost is. The Emirates is the same way, right? Everything starts with the Rolex effect. So they don't want a Longines, right? They don't want a Patek Philippe. They want a Rolex when it comes to weapon systems. They don't want Patriot Pack 3. They are now, according to that list, getting America's most advanced ballistic missile air defense system, the THAAD, the Theater High Altitude Air Defense System. Now, it's taken the Saudis a long time to get competent at the Patriot, but we saw in the Yemen war when the Houthi rebels were
Lost a lot of money.
yeah, they lobbed a lot of missiles into Saudi Arabia, and you were seeing, Patriot missiles going stupid because the operators, fired them out of parameters, and then they would land in the middle of Jeddah or someplace like that. Or the Houthis even exploited air defense gaps to where they drone attacked Abu Dhabi airport, at the executive terminal. So, you know, these capabilities look great on paper. I know a lot of contractors and consultants who worked with the Saudis over the years. One of the biggest problems is foreign language competency on the Saudis' part. So, but they want to make it look good. And Donald Trump is that guy to do that. Because the second truism that was recently, or wasn't a truism, but it was a sort of a policy fixture forever, was that an American president could not be bought. You could buy his weapon systems, but you couldn't buy him and the U.S. policy. You could influence it around the edges. You could influence it with oil.
That has
That
changed.
is, yeah, oh my God, yeah, that's changed. Donald Trump, on that first trip to Riyadh, it was clear he was for sale. And he and his family made it clear they represented America. Their business interest was America. And finally, I kept hearing this I arrived in Doha the day after the October 7th attacks. And, when virtually everyone was flying in, um, on the Biden administration side. But when you saw the transition team of the Trump people, it was complete opposite. It was, first they sided with the Saudis and the Emiratis against Qatar. Then they went to Qatar under the table and essentially said, you pay off Jared Kushner's debt to 666 Fifth Avenue, which they did through a Canadian holding company. And then now they are all friends, right? As
Let me
much as
ask you
the go ahead. I'm sorry.
Let me ask you this. So I
Yeah.
don't mean to interrupt you. You said that the technology of the F-35 in this particular situation that the United States is selling, the 48 one, the 48 jets that are being
Right.
sold, they are at least about 15 years old. Will
Well,
this,
yeah. The
will
technologies.
the technology, yes, will this undermine the Israeli dominance of the Middle Eastern skies with their F-35s? Because that's like one of the main issues that are being debated at the moment, but no
That's
one
a
is like
it's a
talking
good
about
question. It's a good question, and I think that it deserves a really good answer. And the simple answer is no, because the IAF is awesome because one, they not only get a lot of time in training, everything they do is an active combat mission. They could be pulling, circuit flights around Ramat David, and then be rolled off very quickly onto an actual airstrike or, reconnaissance strike or a combat air patrol off of Beirut in a matter of minutes. So they have the ability. Let's just put it this. I mean, their skill level is absolutely phenomenal for that part of the world. And they are on par with the United States. They have more experience than the United States. They just don't have the full range of capability. But the Saudis are still Saudis. Their pilots don't get the same level of intensity of training unless these guys, go to Arizona or they're going out to Red Flag in Nevada. But they are not the IAF. The IAF is how can I put it? The IAF is sort of like a FIFA World Cup team that never ends play. Right. It is always playing. There's no timeouts. There's no breaks. While other teams go back to their home cities, this team is still on the pitch all the time, 24/7, 365. And they rotate, all their newest players in, and the experience level's phenomenal. Saudi Arabia can't buy that. And they've tried. They tried with the F-16s, they tried with the F-15s, but there's also the most important factor most people need to understand. Saudi Arabia has, over the last 25 years, has not seen Israel as a threat at all. When you talk to them, they're like, I'll be quite honest. I went to Abu Dhabi, and of course that's the Emirates, but the same opinion was held in Saudi Arabia. But their attitude was let Israel kick everyone's ass, let them get rid of
has
the Iranian Air Force.
has that changed after Israel hit Qatar?
No. I'm sure they all laughed about that. And if you've been in a D1, right, with these guys, where you if you know that these high level D1s where these guys they all meet, you drink tea, you have dinner, you pray, you have dinner, and and then you would go into these private little meetings. They're laughing at Qatar, not because Qatar got hit, okay? But the Qataris, for Israel to get to Doha, they had to cross Saudi Arabia with permission. Or the, you know? And so, the Qataris understood that. This was all worked out in advance. It allows the Qataris a measure of keeping their hands off by going, oh my God, the Israelis are here. But Qatar had bigger problems, which was the Iranians,
So
lobbing in all these
you
missiles.
would interpret this non-NATO advanced security alliance between Saudi Arabia and the United States not in fear of Israel, but in fear of Iran?
Oh my God, yes. Look, when I way back, I can tell you that the first time that I saw this really at play. People make fun of the Gulf Cooperation Council, certainly after the Yemen debacle. right? Where they went down there thinking they were going to use their highest technology, and got their asses kicked by guys in flip flops with a khanjar. So the Saudi Arabian army, the Emirati forces were humiliated. But way back in the 1980s, the mid 1980s, when I was operating there, and the Iranians were very froggy. They were using asymmetric warfare against the Gulf states. The United States was doing the shipping in Operation Earnest Will, reflagging U.S. tankers so that Kuwait could sell their oil off in the market at a time that Iraq was angry with them because Kuwait was sort of side drilling into Iraqi shoals, and the Iran-Iraq war was still going, and it was about who sided with whom. Well, the Gulf states, of course, sided with Saddam Hussein, and the Iranians were often seeking to play to get them to stop that, and that's why we saw, in the late 1987, Iran planned to destroy Saudi Arabia's oil fields, Kuwait and Saudi Arabia's oil fields off of Dhahran and off of Khafji and Khobar up in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. That was a real thing, using the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, dropping hundreds of Iranian Revolutionary Guardsmen to, land on these fields and oil platforms and blow them up to send a very strategic message. The Saudis have completely reoriented themselves, all the Gulf states, to where Iran is the threat to them now. Iran's a threat to them for two reasons. One, for those of you who live there, I don't want to lecture to people who have lived experience, but my experience is intelligence experience from having lived there and worked there. And there are just some things that I think people don't talk about. One is that there's a 1,400-year war that Iran is very serious, about discussing as to who should control Islam, right?
That's right.
Iran Shia Muslim. They still think that this is the descendants of Khalifa Ali are the people who should do that. And so when you have these tensions during Hajj season with Iranian pilgrims, and during Ashura, in various places, the Saudis see this not just that Iran gets a nuclear weapon and wants to attack Israel. This is really about who someday should control Mecca and Medina. And that's always in the back of their mind. And then, of course, the way that this is played out is through fossil fuels, through oil and oil sales. And it is in the Gulf states' interest to keep Iran as unstable so that there is no Iranian Shia revolution, that pops up in Bahrain. The first time I was in Bahrain in 1986, there were riots in Manama. I couldn't even believe it. I was like, what? This stuff happens? I didn't understand the density of Shia Muslims at that time. Now I really know it. And how deep this goes. This goes back to the 7th century. So that's always on their mind as well. As we all know, the Sunni Muslims of Saudi Arabia really hate the Shia Muslims of Iran, Iraq, and other places.
Even
You know.
of Saudi Arabia. I remember growing up in Saudi Arabia when I was going to private school. Even the private school uses the
Hmm.
guided uh, books from the Saudi government. And
Hmm.
the textbook, they were being telling us that Shias are infidels and infidels deserve the death penalty. I remember that in first grade. Not
Yep.
even so it exists and it takes place. And one of the craziest thing that I saw was when I was giving a debrief for the second brigade at Fort Riley back in when I was in at Kent State University. They One of the military intelligence officers came to me and uh, his question was a very simple question: what is the difference between a Shia and a Sunni? And that simplified the whole like conflict in
Right.
my that happened in the United States and Iraq and and Afghanistan. So it's very interesting to hear you say this because even when you go into Saudi spaces and you hear some of the proud Saudis talk, they will be cursing out the Shia individuals, regardless of who they are. And they usually call them like foreign agents.
Yeah, because they think that they're assets of the Iranian Revolution, when in fact it's a transition war that happened with the first Islamic fitna, right? Right?
That's right.
I mean, Basra versus Mecca. And it didn't help that you had crazy radical groups which sort of have popped up when ISIS and Al Qaeda came, like the Karamita and all of these at that time Islamic cults of the 7th century that really did crazy things during Islamic history. These guys remember that stuff. I'll tell you one thing that surprised me the most when I lived in Abu Dhabi. The first time I saw a Husainiya, right, and identified it as a Shia mosque, I was quite surprised because I saw more churches. I knew where the churches were. I can tell you, I could not point out to you, even living there for a decade, where the Shia Muslims pray. That just, in Saudi Arabia, same thing, right? It may as well be underground. So, but all of these are factors that I think that Westerners, most Americans definitely, and most Westerners don't see that underlying hatred that the Gulf states have against Iran and their revolution. First, they hated the Shah of Iran because he was going to take all their oil and operate in that same way that they were, right? Western, slick Western style businessman going and getting the money and everything, getting a better Rolex than they had, until they saw that their power was stronger with oil embargoes and OPEC limiting oil. But when the Iranian Revolution came, you had a completely different animal that really they saw as an existential threat to their nation. And then boom, 20 years later, 25 years later, you have Al Qaeda, the Arabian Peninsula, which was somewhat backed by the Iranians and some of the leadership holed up in Iran. But you have these two threats. The Saudis figured out that they could deal with the Islamic extremist internal threat, but Iran with a nuclear weapon, that's a different animal.
Um, so I'm looking at this purchase deal. I'm looking at the list of things that Saudi Arabia is getting. Looking at the non-NATO alliance, the nuclear technology, access to AI chips. Does Congress have to approve any of this? And if Trump leaves, does that go away?
Yeah, interestingly enough, Congress will approve the defense sales. I mean, they need to upgrade their C-130s, so we're going to sell them brand new C-130Ks and things like that. Even Eric Prince has a little bit of a hand in there. I don't know if you noticed on that list. I can't tell you how many times I saw this phrase pop up over the last uh, 15 years, but he's been plugging these little light air tractors. They call them Aerotractor, which is a light attack aircraft. And I'm sure somebody has pitched this to them to say this is the kind of aircraft you needed to attack the Houthi rebels, right? Very slow flying propeller driven aircraft. And that's on the list, so a Trump special where everybody gets a taste of that awesome, awesome Saudi money. And it's not just equipment, right? It's more importantly, it's the sustainment packages of logistics, contractors, consultants, materials, and spare parts. Hardest thing the Saudis have ever done, and they have a whole generation of new guys doing it, which is guys who are competent enough in English to actually learn and sustain this equipment. But when the Saudis require them to turn out, they do it. We see there's a relatively high operations tempo for the Saudi Air Force when they need it. Will they be able to operate THAAD the same way that they operate their Patriots? Well, let's hope so. But the beautiful part about it is that THAAD is no threat to Israel, right? It helps Israel. It provides an extra layer of shielding when Iran starts bopping ballistic missiles back over towards Israel or at Iran or at Saudi Arabia. So I think that that stuff is going to get signed off on by everybody. That'll be bipartisan. Now, the AI chip thing is so political and it comes off as a phenomenal bribe, right? This is Trump not understanding what he's doing. The Joe Biden's administration passed the CHIPS Act, where we were going to onshore and build massive AI chip factories in the United States, lessen our dependence on Taiwan. Even Taiwanese companies were doing that. We're bringing it over to the U.S. And because the name Joe Biden was on it, Donald Trump just thought, I'll just give this to my buddies in Abu Dhabi because they asked for it. Why in God's name would we be turning Abu Dhabi into a global AI chip power that, let's be honest, they'll sell to whoever? Okay. Abu Dhabi has replaced Switzerland as the place where you hide your illicit money and where all the Russians are going and spending money and where there's a gray market for everything. But, for Trump, he sees these as commodities, pardon the fun, bargaining chips. But for him, it's like, oh, I'm going to get money. I don't think that's going to go through. I don't think that's going to happen. I think, Donald Trump is pretty much nearing lame duck presidency. And if a Democratic Congress comes in next year, it's finished. They won't allocate a dime to that. And it does not serve America's interest at all.
You got still the civilian nuclear energy. The United States gifted Iran's first nuclear plant, and it was a scientific plant. I remember this because I interviewed Dr. Di Paola from Kent State University. He was a advisor for Hillary Clinton. Um, and now we are going to sell some of most advanced civilian nuclear technology to Saudi Arabia. I mean, Saudi's been trying to get this for a while.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. And now this goes back to an interesting story which I wrote about in one of my books. As you know, I've written 10 books, and out of those 10 books, 6 of them were about terrorism, right? Which I'm very proud of. But 4 of them, all of which were New York Times top 10 bestsellers, were about the Trump administration and their sort of way that they were pushing, rigging the presidential system to be essentially a corporatist, authoritarian government, which, by the way, is the literal definition of fascism. And but a key component of that is all of his players around him were making deals. And one of the people making deals in the run up to the 2016 11 was former Director of Defense Intelligence Michael Flynn. And he was secretly negotiating with the Russians for a Russian light water reactor of the same type that they have at Bushehr nuclear power plant to sell them to Saudi Arabia. Now, that of course requires United States permission, and it's how can I put it? It became a thing because there were secret meetings in the Seychelles. Eric Prince was involved, and things like that. But now, since the rise of Trump too, that illicit stuff is off the table. He just wants to sell them whatever we have in our inventory. Technology be damned. And let's be honest, Saudi Arabia is one of those countries. Remember, I said about the Rolex effect, right? They're not going to be satisfied with the Iranians, 75% of the way to an atomic bomb. I mean, I personally can't understand why Saudi Arabia just hasn't purchased, 5 or 6 atomic bombs from Pakistan, right? They got the money. But they, when you give them a nuclear power plant, there are two reasons for that. Same reason why United Arab Emirates was building a nuclear power plant south of Abu Dhabi on the Saudi Emirati border, because they need every dollar that they can get out of the West by selling fossil fuels and selling natural gas. They do not enjoy using that for their own energy production. They need that money. They want to keep you dependent. It's like a drug dealer on a street corner, right? He does not like tasting his own material. He wants to keep that on the street. So they have gone insane smartly with renewables and nuclear power to manage all of their advanced, their electrical needs. And they can, if any of you have been to Dubai, I remember way back when Abu Dhabi in the mid 80s was like a fishing village with the fort and one hotel, the Meridian. And when I was in the Navy, we hated going to Abu Dhabi, right? Same thing with Dubai. It was a lot more fun. They had Pancho Villa's Mexican restaurant there for tequila night. But at that time, way down at the other end of Jumeirah Beach, there was one oil fired power plant. And when I moved back there in 2006, there were 8. And I think there's like 20 now. They want to get rid of all of those. They want to bring power, and nuclear power, sustainable, relatively clean reactors now. Are look, we operate. I rode submarines when I was in the Navy for part of my missions, and nuclear reactors are very small. So it is in their interest to generate future electrical demand, meet future electrical demand with resources. Okay, it costs you $2, 3, 5 billion to put a power plant there, but you're going to get that back in a fiscal quarter by selling off all of that oil and natural gas. That is what's really the major push for nuclear power in the Arabian Peninsula. They want
Also,
our
don't
money.
forget, you're talking about a desert that mostly cleans, or I don't know what's the correct term in English. They filtrate water from the sea, and
Right.
that takes a lot of energy and a lot of gas, and they want to come to a solution for that particular problem as well.
But you got to give them credit. They do. I'm a little biased because I lived in Abu Dhabi and I met a lot of the royal family. Sheikh Zayed was really a guy that looked into the future, and I see now Mohammed bin Salman is doing the same thing. He's not satisfied with what we could do today. They now see themselves as rich enough to create or take or hijack cutting edge technology and create something amazing from it so that they could run all their kids from university to it and give them jobs. Right, there's 25 million Saudis, and those young men all need jobs, which is partially what fueled the Al Qaeda, the Arabian Peninsula. A lot of lack of jobs, and the welfare state wasn't as wealthy as it needed to be. Now they're building places like these amazing technology cities. Not only are they just building them, and of course buying global entertainment, by the way, which is a smart move on those guys' part, to launder their dirty, filthy money, but to make their people feel like they're the center of something in the future. When I was in the Emirates, they were constantly pushing that Zayed University or some other school, University of Wollongong, would have some specialty area that did not exist and that they wanted it. And one of the things that they did in the Emirates was that they seized all film production from every other desert country in the world. right? Everything's done in Abu Dhabi now. They got Mission Impossible, Fast and Furious. No one goes anywhere. They don't go to Nevada anymore. They go to Abu Dhabi if they want to shoot something in the desert. And they made it cheap. They made it possible. But then now they use advanced technologies. They have green screens, and advanced technology places. These guys do think of the future, and they are using their money to stay steps ahead of other parts of the developing world, so that they are always a crossroads hub for their own people and the region.
I've been saying this for a minute now. The Saudi government used to spend a whole bunch of money at firms like McKinsey to improve their image, especially after the Jamal Khashoggi execution.
Yeah.
Um, and as soon as I would come out or anyone and I'd speak to the media, I'd be wasting their billions of dollars that they spent with that law firm. But now they've learned so much from that mistake that they've decided to spend that money on purchasing sport teams, sport uh, leagues,
Yeah.
and that's because that has a direct impact on people's opinion. Um, and
You, you,
and
ha-
go
you
for
have
it.
to give them credit. It was brilliant, right?
Very
After
brilliant.
the murder of Khashoggi. The idea that, okay, we're not going to be satisfied with Manchester, right? Let's buy global soccer. Let's buy global golf. Let's buy tennis. Not just a little bit of it, all of it. And then let's put within our country, the place where you have the live golf tournaments and you have all these things, which are phenomenal to me because you gotta bring a lot of water in to get that land green. And they what they did was reputation laundering by showing certainly the people who were upset about the murder of Khashoggi, which is people in the United States and some people in the West, but the rest of the world, when they're watching FIFA, they don't care. When they're watching tennis, if you've ever been overseas and you've watched, no, I'm sure you have, I'm talking to the American audience, and you watch CNN International, which is a completely different animal than CNN, or you watch BBC and you watch the commercials, and they'll be like some equestrian commercial with people doing dressage and jumping, and they'll be like, bought to you by Rolex. They've bought all of that, right? When you see that now, it's a Saudi asset. When you see the Gulf, global Gulf, it's a Saudi asset. And the world now has to look in that direction, and like I keep saying, the Rolex effect, right? They own that bauble on their arm, and it's not for bragging rights. It is for their nation is now the center of ownership and operation of these of what people thought was obscure, right? Equestrianism, golf, tennis, camel racing, big, right? Smart move because there are kids in Africa that now will look at Saudi Arabia as the place. After the Qataris did the World Cup, but they'll be looking at these countries as centers of of influence, and then they'll think, "Wow, maybe I can get a job there, or maybe I can work over there." But the Saudis are really doing it for themselves, and they did a brilliant job restoring their reputation with it. And now you got a president that can be bought, right? So now America and Saudi Arabia are joined at the wallet.
I know, like I asked you about the Chinese risk with the F-35s, but we didn't get to that point in particular. Is there a risk that China will get their hand on the F-35? And how much of a risk is that to the United States?
Yeah, it's not so much the aircraft. I mean, because you saw that China is very adept at stealing secrets, which is why all of their aircraft look like, former US designed aircraft. It's the technology of the coatings that make the radar cross section of that aircraft not look like an aircraft, which makes it look like a pigeon, right? so that the aircraft could close within visual range of you. And most advanced fourth generation radar systems or ground based radars will not see you. You're not invisible, right? You're still physically able to be seen by a civil airliner, but you will, to an enemy that you're having a missile to, air to air missile fight, you want to be able to close as rapidly as possible. Not only that, the F-35 gives you a technology that allows you to have awesome situational awareness so that you could fly, you could scramble F-35s, and if I were the Saudis, I wouldn't put them anywhere near the east coast of Saudi Arabia, right? You don't want any trouble with Iran. But, out of Riyadh or out of, Jeddah, and these aircraft will already be communicating with ground control, air defense, command posts, air defense, National Air Command, and will have a full visual signature, of whatever is happening on the Iranian side of the Persian slash Arabian Gulf. And that situational awareness allows you to, to trigger faster and kill faster, especially when you're integrated with the U.S. Air Force and U.S. Central Command out of Doha. That the Saudis, they don't see any threat out there in this world other than the Iranians, and all of this is about being prepared in case Iran, loses their minds and goes back to being as froggy as they were in the 1980s.
About the Rolex effect, do you think that there was an article back in 2022 that there are more than 500 former senior U.S. officials with high clearances working on the payroll of Saudi Arabia and the UAE? Is that part of the Rolex effect, or and I've been told that they've been using that to navigate and undermine U.S. sovereignty.
Well, that this requires me to go back to 1930, right? To the 1930s. There has always been Americans in the Arabian Peninsula working as contractors and consultants from when Aramco was set up, right? Always. And that was seen as twofold. One, oil became a lot more prevalent during World War II and the post World War II world. And two, the United States saw in the post British Empire world that, these countries needed assistance and were rather tired of the British Empire. And even though Land Rover Series 1 cars were like, the hot vehicle of the post World War II world all the way up until the 1980s, having a Land Rover was the kind of car that you had. Um, the United States, working with Aramco, had always had influence as their post World War II. This is just an extension of that. You had when Bechtel was building all of their massive projects. Kellogg Brown and Root were building all of their projects. If you wanted a Saudi Air Force that started with, that was going to transition from British Hawker Siddeley Hunters, right, like the Jordanian Air Force, and ramp up to Phantoms or ramp up to F-15s and F-16s, you had to have a lot of people. 500 people on their payroll is not a lot. But you got to understand, people don't stay in Saudi Arabia for 20 years. These aren't British consultants, right? Old British generals do that. They stay there for a year or two on the basis of a very specific contract, but they maintain their ties, and that gives them points of interest all around the world. But if there's anything I've learned from, some of the Diwans that I'd been to, these guys don't go for mid-level guys. If there's a two-star general, that two-star general is working on some mediocre project. They're going for former chairmen of the Joint Chiefs, the guys who have real influence. You would be quite surprised. Most of them are political. It would be fun to have David Petraeus on the payroll, he doesn't have as much influence as Steve Bannon. So, and you would go to a dinner and you would say, wow, that's the former foreign minister of Australia having lunch, and he's a consultant now to the sheikh. I don't think that that's as important because that's just consulting. These guys are just there. They get their money. They get paid a lot, and they go back to the United States. And that cycle will continue with all of these new weapon systems we're selling to them.
And they're making bank, honestly. Yeah, trust me.
Bank. My late wife, God bless her, used one day came home. I like telling this story. We were in Abu Dhabi. She helped design major sections of the city of Abu Dhabi. The entire new Arts Island, Saadiyat Island, Raha Beach, parts of Ferrari Land, all of this. And one day she came to me, she said, Malcolm, these people have stupid money. And I go, what do you mean? She goes, I was just ordered to give a sole source contract $100 million because they like this guy. And it wasn't in the budget. They just said, give him $100 million and have him put in these water fountains. They don't sometimes know what they got the money for, right? They just have lots of money. They're technically trillionaires in Abu Dhabi, but they just accept billions, as a cover story. So yeah, they have stupid money, and as long as they have that money, you're going to see this cycle of power and economics play out.
Nice. Do you think I'm missing anything before we head to the legal orders that we haven't covered regarding the United States and Saudi Arabia?
Well, let's take some questions.
Yeah, and if there's anyone that wants to request the mic and ask any questions, please go ahead. Otherwise, you are welcome to drop the question down below. Um, the I was told now, like the United States, if they go to war based on this treaty, do you think Saudi Arabia is going to open their bank account just like they did for the first Gulf War?
Yeah, that's an interesting story. I will tell you something. I participated in the first Gulf War, and when we invaded Kuwait, I went ashore with and was aligned with the Saudi forces. Who the commanding general of the Saudis was the future minister of defense. He was one of the top four royal family. When they see an existential threat, they throw money at it. They just throw money at it. But they did want to participate the same way that the Egyptians and the Syrians, everyone wanted to participate in this global operation for operational experience. And the Saudis got a little shamed when the Iraqis, plunged into Hafji and penetrated their territory with some impunity. Now, if we have I find it fascinating that we have this sort of now written on a napkin treaty. I'm not sure that there actually is a treaty. I think it's more of a understanding between Donald Trump and the Gulf states that, hey, if Iran does get something, we're going to come to your aid. That is not necessarily going to survive past, Donald Trump's, or into the next administration. So we'll have to be formalized at some point. My question is, are they, it was hard enough for them to form the GCC, and sometimes countries don't participate in it. Yemen is a good example, right? The Kuwaitis didn't really participate in Yemen, and the Qataris, might have sent some money, but their army wasn't there in a big way. The way the Emirates, which the Emirates, by the way, also another country trying to be a theater level power. When I was in Libya in 2011, and we had that giant proxy war of Turkey versus Abu Dhabi going on, I couldn't believe it. I was looking to my left, I was looking to my right, and I was working with the Abu Dhabi side and didn't understand that these guys have big plans. So how will that work out if this you know, do we call it GATO, right? The Gulf Alliance Treaty Organization or Gulf of Arabia treaty organization. I look forward to seeing more substance to this. But right now, I think it's cocktail talk. Like, yeah, 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 we'll take care of you. Don't worry about it. The same way we did in Doha.
That's actually very big news because the Saudis have been framing this, especially on social media and on their state television, that this is the ultimate protection that Saudi Arabia has been trying to seek for a very long time. And
Well, there's a reason for that.
uh
And that's because they have to now let's look at how they're going to explain it to themselves, right? To their population, to the other Arab states. You want to try to look like there is a strategic balance in which you are not relying on Israel shooting down everything and blowing up everything, right? You now want to have your own special relationship with the United States. And that makes sense. And of course, I would propagandize the hell out of this. Let's just see if this thing actually makes its way into a proper treaty. Because, I mean, what are they essentially saying? Either someone is letting the cat out of the bag that Iran is closer to an atomic bomb than we think,
hmm
right? And that these countries all want a nuclear deterrence. Well, again, Saudi Arabia could buy a nuclear deterrence. It has enough money to buy a ballistic missile launch system, and I personally think that if they were to go to Pakistan and say, "Hey, listen, we got $1 trillion over 10 years. you know, we need to borrow some of them bombs, or we need to
Speaking
borrow some
about
of your
the
technology."
bombs, what do you know about the theory that back in the day Saudi Arabia purchased a nuclear bomb from China?
Yeah, see that story came back. Wow, you're having to make me reach very far back into my analytical work in the 1980s when Saudi Arabia bought these Chinese ballistic missile systems, this intermediate range ballistic missile. I think it's the CSS-5, and made their secret ballistic missile launch site in Saudi Arabia, and it only had five of these liquid fuel missiles. That's when that story, that rumor started. One, I don't think China would sell them one because it requires an enormous amount of security that is easily observable. Uh, Two, if you get one, it's worthless. And how are you going to test it? Are you going to do? Is China going to be doing all the theoretical mathematical testing? Is North Korea detonating it under a mountain for you? I mean, if you really wanted to go buy one, I'd go to North Korea, right? And you don't have to have a working bomb, a completely working device. You just need all the components for a device. Saudi Arabia can get enough experience there. If Pakistan can do it, Saudi Arabia can buy it. So I don't think that they ever bought one. Now, how this relationship, is going to go with the United States, it's as simple as when somebody says, "Hey, we're going to protect you under our nuclear umbrella," that requires an exchange of atomic bombs. Right? People
Well,
have
they,
a
they
hard
did
time.
sign they did sign an umbrella treaty with Pakistan this year.
Right. And that is, that's really the shield of Islam, sort of of
Got it.
of treaty for the South, and it's a smart move on the Saudis' part, right? I'd be throwing billions just to get everybody on my side, but that's really about, you know, let's be honest. I'm not a Muslim, but I play one on television. Um, of infidels versus the Eastern Wall. No, it's not a joke. The Eastern Wall of Islam, which is not funny because there's 92 million Indian Muslims, right? And Bangladesh is Muslim. So, but to get them on side is very important. I think it's very important for the Saudis. You're technically buying Pakistan in the way that you bought the Live Golf Tournament. And but what I find interesting is that the Pakistanis either have no interest in sharing that technology. They would probably have a better bombs if they worked with the Saudis, but only because $100 billion could buy a lot of better technology and not have the stigma of having to smuggle all of your weapons and equipment from other parts of the world when you have the United States on your side. Hmm.
So many people are talking about why is Saudi Arabia playing so hardball on the the Abrahamic Accord treaty, and why did Trump give up on that treaty real quick?
Yeah. You know, the Abraham Accords, the best way to put that is that it's a treaty where you have to walk between the raindrops to have it actually be something. It really isn't something. It strikes me more as I mean, people say that it's a formalized formula that is going to bring peace between the Gulf states on par of Egypt versus Israel and in Camp David, and Donald Trump wanted this big amazing thing. There is a component to that that does have a say, and that is the Arab Street. People have something to say about that. And for all of the, buying World Cup and working on your prestige, you know, even when I lived in the Emirates, a lot of these people were like, "Yeah, we like that the Israelis kick the Palestinians' asses, but we just don't want them over here," right? When they killed a Palestinian in Dubai, actually, outside Dubai airport, in a very sophisticated Mossad operation where they penetrated Dubai and the UAE's security, and then just bopped this guy with a pistol, and then disappeared. They didn't like that so much. They want to work this to where they don't have to explain to their population what's going on. It's better to have the United States as a middleman and have this framework of recognition. There are flights going out of Tel Aviv to Dubai every day now. There are, but are you going to see nonstops going out of Riyadh to Jerusalem to Ben Gurion? I don't. I think that it would have to be done in such a way that they could explain it to, your mother's imam, if you get what I'm saying, right?
Uh, well,
You know, it's
well, there.
it's one thing your dad saying it. It's another thing when your mom and the other moms are like, "Oh, we're on the side of the Israelis now."
I don't know if you
There's a
know
lot to it.
this. I was told by an insider in the
Mm,
royal castle that MBS is very interested in that treaty, but his father is very much against it, even though his father's has Alzheimer's.
right. Yeah, because his father's an old school guy. Mohammed bin Salman is young. Now, caveat, everybody. I've worked in terrorism in that part of the world for going on 40 years. You could quickly wake up dead, right?
Hmm.
Just despite all of your security, right? You
Right.
guys might recall that there was a famous incident with the Minister of the Interior who had an Al Qaeda, the Arabian Peninsula gentleman, who was a friend of his family's, come and meet him and sat down in his office, over dates and coffee, and had a rectally inserted improvised explosive device
That's right.
and almost killed him. This You're talking not just about Saudi Arabia as a global figure, as a player in the global financial economic markets. You cannot ignore the phrase that they are the protectors of the two holy shrines, keepers of the keys of the two holy shrines. And anything that seems like you're straying away from that can bring up forces. Saudi Arabia, though, is got a relatively good security state, and it plays better to keep people worrying about Iran than it does about what you're doing. What you're doing with with Israel, and using the United States as a buffer on that works for them. But you got to get all of the former states there. You got to get the Jordanians on side. You got to get who else? Are you going to get the Syrians on side now? Which is as great as that guy looks in a suit, he could also wake up dead tomorrow morning, and
What
that
do
country
you
could
make
be
of that?
a civil war.
You took yourself to that topic here on your own. What do you make of Al Julani meeting with Donald Trump?
Yeah, that's a slick piece of politics. Well, I have to give him credit because I saw it
Oh,
in Syria that those people are just tired of war, just tired of it. And the guys who were fighting can all now, who were fighting his former HTS buddies and all of the guys who were jihadis can now settle down, get a couple of wives, have a few great weddings for their kids, and have a measure of stability. And their real issue was with the Assad government. I'm old. Okay, I just want to point out to you guys, how old are you, Malcolm? I'm so old. All of my first decade operations were against Bashar al-Assad's father. Syria back then was, a Soviet client state and confrontation state with Israel. How that's going to play out. Will the War Museum in Damascus be cleared out of all that old 1973 war junk and be filled up with, you know, tanks that were destroyed in the Battle of Aleppo in the Civil War? But this guy played it right. I mean, he's coming off as somebody who can do business with the West. He's now even reached out to the Russians, but all of that I have seen bigger dreams vaporize in the flash of a suicide bomb, and Syria could destabilize at any time. And now I don't know that for personally, but when you have a single figure like that and you have competing factions, it could be some aggrieved Alawite who does it, right? It looks great on television going up with Donald Trump and joining the axis of autocrats, but
it's
he
a
better have
TikTok.
big money behind him. And it better be Saudi, Emirati, Qatari. And I don't see that money there yet. Maybe there's promises of it, but we'll see.
I mean,
They
his
want,
watch says they already given him a whole bunch of money, but he's
yeah,
already
but
wearing a bunch of hundreds of thousands of dollars of watches. But I guess that's nothing compared to
I
the.
swear to God, it's like one of the first things I ever learned in the Muslim world. One of the first things I was ever asked was I was in Jeddah when I was a young sailor, and somebody asked, What kind of watch is that you're wearing?" It was a G-Shock or something, and they were very disappointed at my watch. So, but this is very important. But there is no security guarantee he will wake up tomorrow morning. There's no security guarantee that, some Islamic faction, fundamentalist faction, or ISIS will resurge and flip everyone who thought he was going to come and be a good guy and now watches him go out and pretend like he's a Westerner. He's not a jihadi's jihadi, right? He's a reformed jihadi, and they generally wake up dead.
You make a very good point. You make a very good point. There is a question that's outside of our topic today.
Sure.
Uh, a person says, "What is your take on what's happening in Nigeria? Trump, is he really going to put boots on the ground?"
That is a crazy story. I wrote a Substack on this. Actually, I did a video about 2 weeks ago about the four wars that Donald Trump threatened in 24 hours. Full disclosure, been to Nigeria, been up in the northwest corner, been in the Lake Chad area. I did Nigeria, Cameroon, both sides. Been, flew and drove up to Mara and Garoua, which were at one point ISIS Boko Haram strongholds, right? And that whole, we now have these people in the White House who personally defunded U.S. defense operations in support of the Nigerian government during the first Trump administration. And because Joe Biden restored some of that, got rid of it again this year, and then woke up and goes, "Hey, wait, there's an Islamic fundamentalist, insurgency in that area where there's been an Islamic fundamentalist insurgency for the last 25 years." It's like we're dealing with an administration of truly incompetent people who don't know what they're doing. Everything is a flying by the seat of your pants. And you're just seeing it now. Do you know where this story came from? That there was a a a Christian genocide going on up there. Well, we all know that there's been this Islamic insurgency with Boko Haram for decades, and now the Fulani uh, tribesmen are engaging in essentially anti-Christian operations. No, let me rephrase that: anti-Nigerian. Okay, their victim population has overwhelmingly been Nigerian Muslims, and it always offends me when I hear these guys go, "Oh, they're killing Christians," and I go back and I go, "They're killing 8 times as many Muslims because they're just killing people, whoever happens to be there. And if you don't side with them, or they don't kidnap your daughters or rape your wife and take your cows, then it is not about a genocide happening to Christians." But this crazy woman, Laura Loomer, who is a mentally ill Jewish woman from South Florida, who I don't know what she's given Trump, but whatever she's doing for him, she has enough power out of her big fat, surgically enhanced face to make him believe in one tweet that there was a genocide in Nigeria and that he needed to threaten the central government of Nigeria over something that they had been fighting for decades. It's mind boggling how ridiculously stupid these people are. But the full might, as soon as Trump said it, Pete Hegseth was out there. This guy's an alcoholic. He's a sexual assaulter. He was adjudicated, essentially settled a rape claim against him. No one respects him in the Pentagon. And he immediately says, "I'm mobilizing the Pentagon to be prepared to defend Christians." So, excuse me, we go from a foreign policy that is based on supporting our democracies. Nigeria is a democracy, however flawed it is, largest population in Africa, a country that's advancing in leaps and bounds in many ways, a model for some parts of Africa, and a natural resource powerhouse. And we're going back to the Crusades. We're using Crusader language. Are we going to do this in Uganda? Are we going to do? But this. He doesn't ever mention Central African Republic, and or DR Congo, unless it's that imaginary war that he settled. Trump actually thinks he he actually thinks he solved the Rwandan genocide. Okay, this is where we are there. Stupid people who have money, who now think that they are masters of the universe. And if I were a Muslim, I would be very offended by this. Um, that they're not coming to defend the Muslims of Nigeria. They're coming to defend the Christians. And that could turn into sectarian warfare. Let's say something dumb happens, like the United States actually sends troops to support the government, and it becomes we're only supporting the Christians. Well, now you've given every terrorist group, Al Qaeda and the Islamic Sahel, all these other groups, a reason to start bringing in thousands and thousands and thousands of fighters to have a real cause to fight against rather than stealing wives and camels and cattle. This is the dumbest story I've ever heard. Sorry, you got me on a rant because I really think this is stupid.
That's really sad. Um, I want to get to a question of with your long work in anti-terrorism, where is the current uh, global war on terror is today after what, 15, 20 years? And then the other question that I have for you before we move into the illegal orders is that 15 out of the 19 hijackers for 9/11 were from Saudi Arabia. Today, there was new information that came out regarding the direct Saudi royal family involvement in that attack. What kind
Mm.
of justice are these family able to get with their new lawsuits against the Saudi government? Do you know anything about that?
It's an interesting question in the sense that American citizens are looking for this. I don't think they're going to get what they want, which is Saudi government culpability in the 9/11 attacks. And if you just look at the White House, I just want to point it out that that pageant when Mohammed Salman arrived with the horses, the flyover, no one has ever gotten that before. That is not normal. Okay, that's Bastille Day for Saudi Arabia in Washington D.C. The 9/11 families are not going to get a admission of culpability. What I find interesting is that for all of the reputation laundering by the Saudi government, why don't they just pay them off $1 billion to say, as a sort of
That's actually a very good idea.
say again?
That's a very good idea, actually.
Well, what's the payoff for a family that you've harmed? Dia, right?
Yeah, that's right.
But to just say, listen, they were our citizens. They were corrupt, horrible Muslims. Only God can judge them. If there's anything I've ever learned, that's a fact, right? Only God can judge them. But we would like to offer you this token. And $1 billion on the table. What's it to them? Goodwill. But there's something about this that they find reprehensible. By the way, you're right. It was 16 out of 19 hijackers, but there was a 17th that was a Saudi living in Sharjah in the United Arab Emirates, so he doesn't get a pass. And I actually ran into one of them.
Oh
Turns
my
out
God.
one of the San Diego, one of the it's actually in an FBI report that you can find on the internet. Three of them, 2 out of 3 of them were at a shooting range in San Diego, and I was at the range that day and filed an FBI report. And I was teaching counterterrorism at the time, and I said this guy was shooting a 22 caliber pistol like a submachine gun with his fingers. This young kid, and it was Ahmed Noah, one of the um,
Wow.
one of the hijackers out of the San Diego cell. And but I think that should be put to bed. And by bringing Mohammed Salman here, I'm more upset with what he did to Adnan Khashoggi uh, than what he did with then I don't think they have culpability in 9/11. They just use Saudi Arabia and their money and their fluid passports to go out and do this. But Saudi Arabia has lost, oof, I can't even remember how many people they lost in the Arabian Peninsula jihad, but a significant amount, enough to
I
recognize that we're
experienced that time that I was in Saudi Arabia when I was at that time 2 years in Riyadh when the explosions were happening. I kind of passed by an explosion once or twice. Um, but yeah, I remember that time period, and it was a very bloody time. and the Saudi government did a whole campaign of retaining those extremists. And I think the biggest part to that was that you have a whole bunch of people that came after the Cold War, fighting the Russians, and they just were treated like criminals instead of being treated like a member of, a group that fought, from people that were sent there. Uh,
Right, the Afghan Arabs. Yeah, I wrote an entire book about this called An End to Al Qaeda, where I talked about the Saudis needed to form those rehabilitation programs to bring these people back into society, give them some measure of honor, and then get them a house, get them a car, get them four wives, get them 20 kids, and these guys will not be practicing jihad, right? And have them rehabilitated through the imams, which the Saudis did. They did a rehabilitation program that was just like that to bring them back into society. But these that's the problem with dealing with cults, and Al Qaeda and ISIS were arguably, and that's what my book was about, the sixth iteration of where they thought they were better Muslims and everybody in the Muslim world was not a Muslim unless they joined the jihad. So the Saudis worked it their way, but it cost a lot of people their lives. And instead of sharing that sympathy, I think they just didn't want to discuss it, because by equating those guys to the 9/11 hijackers and a shared experience, then it would seem sort of like they were making a judgment that only God could make. I've heard that a lot. Them saying, "Hey, we can't question their Islam. We can't question what they did. God did that." Oof, it's a tough nut to crack.
Hey, that is. Where is today's global war on terror?
Yeah, thankfully, the authorization of the use of military force after 9/11 has passed. We are out of the global war on terrorism. We have a lot of guys back there who like to equate this as a major act of war. But the problem is, even though we've gotten rid of ISIS in Al Sham, in Syria itself, and we've rooted them out of Raqqa, they still exist in Afghanistan, trying to prove to the Taliban that they are better Muslims and harder core jihadists than the Taliban were. We still have them in Yemen, operating in southern Yemen. You've got the Houthis, which is a completely different kettle of fish, right? A Shia Muslim faction that's backed by a state, and then still got Al Shabaab still going in Somalia, going strong, and now you have these transient groups um, across the Islamic Sahel, right, across the southern uh, um, Sahara Desert.
That's right.
So they're small, but they're still there. And one of the biggest threats to our stability of that is when Russia started buying off countries like Chad and Mali and kicking out French resources that were keeping groups like ISWAP and Al Qaeda of the Islamic Sahel, all these other groups at check. So they are going to find out over time that the guys who tried to burn the library in Timbuktu eventually are going to come back. Because when they're not being watched and they're not being engaged, that means they're growing. And unless you're replacing that with economic opportunity, of which there is zero, they're only going to get stronger.
Um, Malcolm, we heard the president or saw the president tweet or truth, crazy ordain of calling on executing U.S. members of or veterans who were saying or pulled out a video saying that if you are asked to do something illegal, you can refuse that act. What do you make of this?
Okay, I'm glad we're shifting to this subject because you guys know I spent 20 years in the Navy. I was a senior enlisted, which means that I'm the person who had to, as the senior, non-commissioned officer and technical expert, my job was to push reality down the chain of command to make sure nobody below me did anything stupid, and to push my, you know, decades of experience up the chain of command so that officers wouldn't do anything stupid. There is a reality that we have to understand that the United States lives in a sort of post Vietnam War fantasy world that their young men and women can do no harm. The United States, we've had soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines carry out massacres of civilians. The one of the first ones occurred in the Iraq War, the Haditha Dam massacre. A soldier was killed by an IED, and 8 other soldiers went on a rampage in the town, Haditha, near the Haditha Dam, and just massacred everyone they saw. 5 guys were standing around a taxi stand. They just gunned them down. Then they ran into these houses and they killed, I want to say, 13 women and children. Just shot everyone. The youngest was age 1 years old. That um, the soldiers who did it were following a staff sergeant because they lost their buddy. You cannot go and just start mass murdering civilians. But Donald Trump is famous for pardoning murderers and war criminals who were convicted of murder by the military. And needless to say, anything that they did, if they gave orders for people to cooperate or support them, were illegal orders. This controversy stems over one thing and one thing only. Trump and his administration. Okay, on the table, folks. I'm an intelligence professional. I am giving you my. If this were, I always say this. If this were Botswana, I would be giving you the same assessment. The president of the United States is the single most documented liar in American history. That is a fact. That is just a fact. You can count every lie he said in his first term. They stopped counting during the Biden years and they're starting to count again. He's well over 50,000. So when he says, when 6 congressmen and senators come up and just remind our service members of what we remind them of every time they go on deployment, don't do anything stupid, don't follow any illegal orders. Following illegal orders is a crime. Okay? The judge advocate generals say this to all the troops before they go overseas every time. And you don't get it just once in boot camp. I was an instructor at the Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape School, which is our advanced school for getting captured and escaping, right? So we kept hammering into the heads of our soldiers. There's some things you can do, but you cannot violate the Geneva Convention. You cannot torture people. And just to make sure that they understood that, we had a simulation group that tortured them to show them torture's bad. So, we have these people come out because we have a president that is giving illegal orders. And the first thing I hear from right wing crazies is name one illegal order. Okay, I'll name one. When you order CIA drones to blow up boats that you don't know who's in them, you don't know what's in them, you see them come from a port that may have been associated with drugs at one point, you think that the payload has drugs in it. For decades, we've been sending the Coast Guard down there and intercepting those boats and taking the drugs off and putting the criminals in jail or sending them back. That's not what's happening. What's happening now is the Tom Clancy novel, A Clear and Present Danger, where we are just extrajudicially killing whoever is on the high seas that we suspect is a drug dealer, which is not a crime in the United States. When you're on the high seas, the crime starts when it comes in U.S. territory. If that boat goes from Caracas, Venezuela to Trinidad and Tobago, it would take it's 6,000 freaking kilometers, right? almost 2,000 miles. That little Ponga boat can go maybe 150 miles. This is a fantasy that's going on. And someone said, let's just kill them when they come out of port. That is extrajudicial, and it's called murder. Whoop, did I drop out?
No, no, I was just fixing the space to give you
Okay,
co-host.
there you go. So that's what the problem is. This administration is given unlawful orders, sending U.S. Marines into Los Angeles, taking them off a combat training deployment for going overseas, and then having them detain U.S. citizens. The first person that the U.S. Marines detained was a veteran walking to the Veterans Administration Hospital. He was an American citizen. They detained him, they zip cuffed him, they tied him. That is a violation of the rights of an American citizen and a violation of the Constitution. It is the number two listed thing that is an illegal order. And this is the problem. We have all these people who want to play barracks lawyers, and they think that, oh, well, Trump hasn't done anything wrong. He's done a lot of things wrong. The judge just ruled his deployment of the National Guard to Washington, D.C. was illegal. They do illegal things first and they ask questions later. And my rank in the armed forces, my job was to recalibrate stupid people and stupid decisions. And if I had heard Pete Hegseth, for example, using his mobile phone to start sending messages to his wife about airstrikes, I would have taken his phone and thrown it down the burn bag chute and told him he's a fucking idiot. The problem is we don't have enough people obeying the law. And now these six lawmakers, who, by the way, have a Article 1 constitutional duty to draft legislation. They are the premier um, representation in America, according to the Constitution. The president is an Article 2 power. He is a co equal branch of government. They have the right to say this. And they also have that right under the First Amendment. And they also have a right, as former military and intelligence professionals, to make sure stupid things are not being done because our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines are getting potentially stupid orders that will break the law. I don't see a problem with it, but Trump immediately came out and had his marionette, Caroline Levitt, come out and say they're telling them to disobey lawful orders. They literally flashed the words illegal orders on the screen. So we're in black is white, up is down world.
Is the orders to strike down boats that are going from Venezuela out are illegal orders?
Well, we don't know. Here's the kicker. The first three people that Donald Trump fired after he fired the black chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the woman commandant of the Coast Guard were the top three lawyers, judge advocate generals, officers whose job it is to interpret the laws of war for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Secretary of Defense. He fired them. Why? He didn't want a lawyer watching this. By any measure, a vessel that is at sea that you have not positively identified as committing a crime that is punishable by death, the law of the sea says that you cannot do that. Now, I will caution you, there is still a law on the books of the U.S. Navy that pirates can be hung from the yardarm. Okay? Now, that is a decision that must be made by the captain. There is no captain in the modern world that is going to go out and violate the superseding Geneva Convention because if this is a war, which Trump has said all of these drug dealers in all of Latin America are now part of a narco terrorist syndicate, which is interesting because I wrote the technical manual that's used all over government, the Terrorist Recognition Handbook. That isn't in there. Narco terrorist was Pablo Escobar when he blew up a civil airliner and would start blowing up bars and restaurants. That's narco terrorism. And we got him legally. We let the government of Colombia get him, and they shot him to death. This is people engaging in narco trafficking. That is not that is not a capital punishment in the United States. And if it was, you would have to go to trial. You would have to give them due process. You would have to bring in evidence. This is literally the scenario from the Tom Clancy novel, A Clear and Present Danger, where they were using F 16s to just shoot down any airplane they suspected was a drug dealer. And there was a big debate in Tom Clancy's book about, are we violating the law by killing American citizens? Turns out they were shooting down American citizens. And it turns out that it was ruled unlawful. All of this is unlawful right now. That's unlawful. You cannot just kill people. The first boat that they attacked, by the way, was 16 passengers. I have never seen a drug or narcotic related smuggling that takes 16 passengers. It was a passenger ferry boat between Trinidad, Tobago, and Venezuela. And the only two people they could confirm were two young men who were killed, who were transient workers in Venezuela. So, did we murder them? If this gets to court, it will come out that the president did issue unlawful orders, and that he essentially ordered the murder of what's going on 100 people now.
Sounds like there might be a complicated international case at the Geneva Convention or something.
Well, the question is this, the United States does not send people to the International Court of Tribunal in The Hague, right? The ICCT. Well, a President Gavin Newsom might. I mean, these people need to start thinking about when they commit crimes for this White House. They need to understand this is not a dictatorship. As much as they want it, there are no kings in America, and there will be investigations and there will be accountability.
Lucas has his hand raised. Lucas, welcome to the space.
Thanks for having me up, Waji and Malcolm. I've been enjoying listening to listening to your expertise in the Middle East and intelligence. I wondered. I did not serve in the military. I was shocked to see the video that Elise Slotkin released, and my shock was in regards to, it seemed to me that it was implying or recommending that service members disobey their orders. And I wondered if you had any thoughts as to what they should do, because I, my understanding is they take an oath to the Constitution, but the second clause in that oath is to obey the President of the United States. And I worry, as a civilian, how the military operates if there is no established chain of command. So should they be disobeying orders? Should they drag their feet, or should they resign?
Okay, listen. You've made a fundamental mistake here, and this is what is being pushed about in right-wing media. They did not say anything that you said. The video, if you go back and watch it, they say, we are talking to the service members. By the way, in August, I was in Washington, D.C., and I was down at Union Station with a group called Remember Your Oath. And we were playing General Milley's retirement speech and reminding the National Guardsmen down there that they have an oath to the Constitution, not to the president. And that here, the key part of that oath is one of the things I spoke to a National Guard Sergeant Major about from Mississippi. I said, don't let your soldiers do stupid things. And he goes, that's exactly what I'm here for, which is another which is senior NCO talk for. Don't let some guy go off the handle and start killing civilians. The video they made said these very words, which were all the way across the screen. So I don't know how you confused it. You have an obligation, so do not follow illegal orders. In the Uniform Code of Military Justice, Article 91 and Article 92, you have an obligation to follow all lawful orders. And we do every day. Turn the course. Here's a good example. Turn the ship to a course of 350. Turn to ship 350. That's a lawful order. Here's an illegal order. I want you to go into the weapons magazine, set a fire so that we blow the ship up. That's an illegal order, right? You will not carry it out. Life, limb, safety of the vessel. Here's another example, and I put pictures of this up today. In 1968, Lieutenant William Calley was given orders to what he thought were orders that he was supposed to. Everyone in this village called Malai were um, were Vietnamese, North Vietnamese soldiers, and that officer ordered his company, Charlie Company, I can't remember the element of the unit, to mass murder 300 civilians, man, woman, and child. And if somebody would like to go on my Twitter feed, there is a post there today where I post how I don't understand how so many Americans have never heard of the My Lai massacre. And this man gave an unlawful order, an illegal order. And the first element of an illegal order is where you are ordered to commit a crime or a war crime. If this and military obligation to not follow that order, right? The staff sergeant at the Haditha Dam massacre in Iraq, IED goes off, kills a popular corporal. He orders his soldiers to murder every Iraqi in sight and then go in the house and kill the men, women, and children. That was an illegal, unauthorized, unlawful order. It was a crime, and he is a war criminal. Of course, they hushed it up. They got the guy out, kicked him out of the Marine Corps instead of sending him to prison for murder. And the other 8 Marines didn't go to prison for murder, right? That is an illegal order. If I order you as an officer from an order from the President of the United States in Lafayette Square to kill all the protesters, that is an illegal order. By the way, I'm not using that as a hypothetical. Donald Trump ordered the Secretary of Defense, Mark Esper, to use the National Guard to shoot the civilians in Lafayette Square. And he did it nice. He said, I'm not going to give you he didn't say, I'm not going to give you an order. He said, listen, can't you just shoot them in the legs? Have any of you fired a high powered military grade weapon? When you shoot a person down low, it's going to hit them in the groin or the thigh, and they're going to bleed out in less than a minute. It's another way of saying, can you just kill those civilians? The Secretary of Defense at least had the wherewithal to say, I'm sorry, that would be considered an unlawful order. In other words, no one's going to carry that order out. No one in the U.S. Armed Forces. But you know what? There's always some dumbass who thinks that he knows better. So if you heard those people saying don't follow lawful orders, then you need to go back and watch that video and look for the word illegal and recalibrate yourself because you're completely off. But it's not your fault. Fox News is pushing this bullshit. The White House is pushing this bullshit all day that they told them not to follow orders. That is a straight up lie. We follow orders left, right, and center. There are people who do not follow orders all the time in the military. That is not sedition or treason. That's called insubordination. We write guys up every day for insubordination. Every day. I'll bet you there's 100 of guys who are like, fuck you, Sergeant, I'm not doing that. Or I'm tired. Or doesn't get out of his bed when ordered to. That's insubordination. That is not what's going on here. These are members of Congress who have a First Amendment right to say any fucking thing they want. Sorry about I'm using my language because I'm going back to senior NCO world. You say anything they want, and as members of the House and the Senate, they have an obligation to remind people from time to time not to do anything stupid. By the way, they were all veterans out of the military. Since when do veterans not have the right to speak up and say what they want? Well, in Trump world.
My next question to you, Malcolm, is uh, how do these comments impact Trump's comments about executing um, members of the military or former members of the military impact the morale of the military?
Well, first off, I'm going to tell you something funny today. Everyone inside the armed forces is now having these conversations. And I can tell you what they're saying. Number one, they all think Pete Hegseth is a moron. The guy was the equivalent of a National Guard reservist major. And when he spoke to all the officers and senior enlisted of all the higher commands that he brought to Washington for a rally, he was speaking to a combined experience. Literally, we calculated this. The average combined experience of all of those people in the room who were generals, 6 or 7 levels higher than he ever achieved, was 32,000 years of combined U.S. Armed Force experience. So when our service members hear the president say things like, well, that's treason and sedition, we got to go back and send our senior NCOs and officers and not and judge advocate generals to recalibrate them because the president lied. Sedition is what happened on January 6th because it requires force to overthrow the government. They're forced to overthrow the government. That's not what happened here. These people spoke their mind. And the president of the United States, as commander in chief, has decided he has done, Michael Cohen, who is his lawyer, and I were discussing this the other day. And he said, what this is called in the legal world is dicta. Dicta is what a dictator and a king does, which means my word is law. Well, we don't live in a country where that applies. Donald Trump's word is not law. And sure as shit, Caroline Levitt comes out the next day like a dumbass. Sorry, I'm descending into my senior NCO language again. And says, if the president says it, it's legal. That is a lie. All U.S. military law since George fucking Washington has made it clear that we don't have a king and that what he says must be given to him through powers enacted through the people, through their elected representatives.
What
So
kind
when I
of
hear stupid shit like that, I get angry because
what
it's
kind of
dumb and it's going to cause someone harm.
what kind of dangers does this like? Yeah, I mean, like I come from a dictatorship. I see I've seen my first execution when I was about 10 years old. Uh, like I know the danger of what it means to live in a dictatorship. But like, what is the real potential, real world danger, security risk of a president using rhetoric like punishment or punishable by death against political opponents in the United States? Or like, are we
You know,
watching the democracy lose its place?
well, democracy is on decline in the United States. We are living in an autocratic dictatorship. I'm saying that as an intelligence professional. I wrote a whole book about it. Right? Four, actually. The plot to hack America, the plot to destroy democracy, the plot to betray America. And my last book was about the right wing extremist crazies who are carrying out most of the violence in the United States, including 1,600 felons that were all pardoned and are now allowed to join law enforcement in the United States. That book was called They Want to Kill Americans. Um, the problem is that when the president of the United States says something via dicta, crazy people believe him. And me, as a senior NCO, and I actually had all of these people, by the way, Jason Crow, Congressman Jason Crow was an airborne ranger who served combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. He was an officer. He knows what he's talking about. And what he said was what everyone says before they go out on patrol. Don't do nothing stupid. Don't make any war crimes. Don't do anything illegal. If the guy next to you says, let's go rape that woman over there, that's a war crime. You turn him in, we arrest him, we send him back. That, by the way, happened a lot. I'm going to give you a good example. Famous incident down in Nasiriyah in Iraq in 2006 for 2005, I believe, I wrote a book called The Terrorists of Iraq, an encyclopedia of every major terrorist group in Iraq and every major terrorist attack that they carried out. At one point, the only place you could buy it was Camp Victory in the Rashid Hotel. And one incident happened where a soldier goes in Nasiriyah, goes rogue, goes into a house full of Iraqis at night, rapes a 14-year-old girl, kills her, her mother, and her father. And do you know what happened the next day? This was that was down in Nasiriyah. The next day, Al Qaeda of Iraq, AQI, carries out a revenge attack. But before they do it, they go to the village and they go, listen, we know you're Shia, we're Sunnah, but we're going to kill those motherfuckers. The whole village supported it. And the next day, you know what we found? We found two soldiers who were disemboweled and had their, emasculated is the word. But it wasn't the soldiers that carried out the murder. It was just two soldiers that were on watch. This is what happens when you commit war crimes. When you don't check your buddy, when you don't check each other. And the reason we had Abu Ghraib is because George W. Bush made it clear that the gloves were off, according to Dick Cheney, and the atmosphere of the commander in chief filtered down to these people, and they were torturing people in Saddam's prison using tortures even Saddam hadn't come up with. Right? And what happened to us? We put 8 of them in prison. Most of them walked. These things have consequences.
Create an equation for it's a little bit different than what you're talking about exactly, but CIA created an equation for every innocent civilian an airstrike hits. How many do we create of terrorists? And it was about 1.5.
I believe that. And I actually that ratio is probably off. Depends on where you're at. I in my book, the defeating ISIS, I wrote about this analysis I called Three Weddings. And because we have a lot of people that are dumbasses who don't use their intelligence, they don't check against culture, language, and culture, language, history, and precedents. We wiped out 3 weddings in Afghanistan for a total, I think it was 150 people. I mean, gunned them all down, every person, man, woman, and child, from an AC 130 gunship. I personally think that that led 10 years later to the fall of Afghanistan back to the Taliban. Taliban wasn't wiping out every person, right? The point is that we have these blithe, casual attitudes. Donald Trump has set a command climate now to commit violence against other American citizens. Jason Crow, Congressman Crow, put out an audio recording today of 3 death recordings, death threats, and they were horrible. Like, I'm going to kill you. I hope I want to see your family die in front of you before we kill you. And these dumbasses don't realize they're all going to go to prison. All those calls are tracked and traced coming into Congress. But Donald Trump has given them a permission slip for that. And that's what my last book was, 350 pages of people threatening violence, murder, and QAnon nuttiness that led to the January 6th attack and terrorist attacks ever since.
Yeah, there are plenty of questions. I'm just going through them. I just received the question, and you talked a little bit. We talked a little bit about Al Julani, but this is from someone from Syria asking, how can Trump flatter uh, Ashara, the president of Syria, even though his name was on the terrorist list? People are now wondering if by killing someone, their name can eventually be removed from such list.
There's something to be said about cutting peace deals with your former enemies. When Menachem Begin, who was one of the founders of the Irgun, right, a Jewish diaspora settler terrorist group. No other word, no other way to put it, right? I mean, these guys blew up the King David Hotel. By the way, hotel I really like going to when I'm in Jerusalem, right? Best French 75s in Jerusalem. Um, and killed 86 people. Then engaged in a war, of atrocities back and forth over the decades. And he made peace with Anwar Sadat as state to state peace. If the problem with Trump is that Trump doesn't look at what you've done, Trump looks at how much money you bring. The peace deal that he cut with the Taliban, this idiot is, pardon me, but Trump is an idiot. Suddenly this year is talking about reinvading Afghanistan if the country that he gave to the Taliban with his secret peace deal that released 5,000 of their hardest core fighters, experienced fighters, and allowed that country to collapse because he wanted it to collapse under Joe Biden. That if we don't give them Bagram Air Base back, he's going to do what? Invade? I mean, he's an idiot. 20 years we were in Afghanistan. I was in Afghanistan in late December 2020, and 2001, and when there were virtually no U.S. forces in Afghanistan, out in Jalalabad and in the eastern provinces. It's just mind-boggling. If any of you see we are all relatively educated and well-informed people, and you must maintain that. And that's why, as an intelligence professional, I maintain the standards of my career field, because the moment you decide your ideology and belief in a person is stronger than the facts that are there, no offense to you, Lucas, but I'm going to use you as an example, where the video of those six congressmen says illegal orders in giant block letters across the whole screen, but you don't hear or see them because you were told by somebody else. That means you're not fact checking your own bullshit. And in the intelligence community, my job was to make sure everything was double checked, triple checked, checked again, and then I would be the most skeptical person to determine whether I was biased. And I would find somebody and we would say, nope, that's what's happening. And I would hope that our analysis would make sure that the right people got killed and that our citizenry were safe, right? But if you go by ideology, then you're no better than Saddam Hussein calling out people from, the Ba'ath Party meeting and having them taken out of the room and shot because you don't care what reality is. You've created an alternate reality. Okay, next question.
Someone wants your input on the Ukraine deal, the new one.
Yeah, what a disaster. Oh, Jesus. I've spoken about that about 4 hours today, on Substacks and YouTube Live. As full disclosure, you guys know, for a year I was a member of the Ukrainian International Legion, which means that I was a member of the Ukrainian Army. For those skeptics out there who thought that I sat in a hotel room in Lviv, that's not true. I was actually a frontline soldier in Kharkiv. Took part in the Kharkiv counteroffensive as a designated marksman slash scout sniper. That's the phrase the Ukrainians use. It is not exclusive to the U.S. Marine Corps. And I dragged an M14 sniper rifle with a thermal scope around in combat in Ukraine. That being said, I'm biased, right? That deal is the exact same deal that Vladimir Putin offered in March of 2022, almost word for word, with the exception that Donald Trump would get 50% of the profits of all mining and reconstruction that was taken from Russian monies that would be spent in Ukraine. So if you guys haven't figured out that he doesn't care what it looks like. He doesn't care what dictatorship he works with. He wants the money. And Zelensky made a statement today that, mark my words, this will go down in history. And fortunately, the Europeans are stepping up. And that is, Zelensky essentially said today that the special relationship between Ukraine and the United States is over. He said if he will have to make a choice, here's his words, he will have to make a choice between losing its largest partner or their dignity. And Ukrainians, for anybody who's ever met a Ukrainian over there during this war, they are Cossacks. They will not surrender. They will fight till they have all their land back. And they have the manpower to do it. They have the weapons now are coming from Europe. The United States is not giving essentially anything. If you guys want to get really deep dive, there's a guy named Dave P., former Army intelligence guy, runs a museum of armor equipment out in Texas. Him and Intel Schizo, those guys are or Lev Parnas. He brings in Alexander Bovovich. Those guys, if you see their Twitter spaces, jump on them. They will give you down to the unit analyses of what's going on. And that deal is dead. It was dead the moment it was said. It was done by Steve Witkoff in private, and every bullet point on there is Russian. The Ukrainian army would have to be reduced to 600,000 people, including reserves. All of the F 16s, Mirage 2000s would have to leave the Ukrainian Air Force and be stationed in Poland. It was an article to disarm themselves, that there could be no joining NATO ever, and that they would have to put it in the Ukrainian constitution. You know, my favorite part about this is Zelensky managed to say today, "Go fuck yourselves," without saying "go fuck yourselves." It was very nice. It was like, we want to work with our partners if they're serious. Right? Look, when Zelensky came into office, he was a TV show comedian who did a show about what would happen if a comedian became the president of Ukraine after Yanukovych, the most corrupt president of all of Ukraine. And that guy, and the first show is him taking his bag lunch, and they bring him over to the presidential residence, which is now a museum of corruption in Kiev, and talk to him about being careful of the mahogany stairs that are going up. And it's filmed on the actual site. And he's like, I'm not going to do that. That was the character he played in the show, Servant of the State. And then he became that guy in war. That guy is literally our Churchill of this century. It's an insult. This is like coming up to him after the Battle of Britain, after you have bombed London, Coventry, Birmingham, set fire to Sheffield and Manchester, and then come up and say, listen, we're only going to invade, Hastings, and we're only going to take the cliffs of Dover, from Dover down to Brighton. And you can have the rest, but you got to limit your army, and you can't get any more advanced weapons. And we pinky promise we won't invade you again. That deal is dead. It's dead. It's not even worth discussing anymore.
Thank you. Before I go to any other questions, I'd like to request from everyone to like, share the space, and invite their friends to join us. If you have any questions, please type them down there, request the mic, or send them to me in chat in the messages. Um, I always ask every person that I meet from the intelligence community, what do you think is the next big threat to the United States?
Unfortunately, if you guys go to my Substack, which is malcolmnance.substack.com, I do an interview last week. Great interview. It's not one of the most watched ones. It's on YouTube on my Black Man Spy podcast with Sue Gordon. Sue Gordon, awesome person. She's that saying, a professional's professional. She is a spy's spy. Everyone loves Sue Gordon. Everyone loves her. And you wouldn't look twice at her in a Walmart or a Target. She's a big lady, very nice, genteel, very amusing character. You wouldn't look twice at her. 27 years in the CIA, right? 4 years at National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, and then became Deputy Director of National Intelligence. Everyone loves this person. She reinvented combat support at National Geospatial Intelligence. She is old school CIA. Every name I threw out back to Aldrich Ames, the team of women that hunted down Aldrich Ames, she knew them personally. She is a walking museum of espionage. And her discussion, we had somebody wrote a really great compliment in our comments. They said, that wasn't an interview. You two were just talking to each other as spies, you know? And I really appreciated that. It was a conversation I could have. We didn't go into next threats because the biggest threat that U.S. has right now is internal. And that is this ideological civil war that's being waged against the United States government. It's happened before, but nothing like we're seeing now. There's big difference between, we talked about Admiral Stansfield Turner. If you go watch the movie Joe Wilson's War, he's the guy who came to the CIA and gutted it of anyone who was from the culture that they were spying in, right? When I first came in the military, if you were Spanish, if you were a Latino, they would not let you do operations in Latin America. They sent you to Korean or Chinese, right? Because they didn't trust you. And then, of course, when Nicaragua broke out and El Salvador was going down, they pulled in all these Spanish and Chinese, Spanish, native Spanish linguists from all over the world to do this operation. It was stupid, right? It was a dumb ass decision. The problem is that's what we're in now, only the enemy is the president of the United States. And I say that as a professional. National intelligence, who the only thing that I can say that I am glad about is she is spending all of her time chasing 1001 Dalmatian puppies and staying the fuck out of the business of intelligence because she is a mentally ill nutter who is on the side of Moscow and no one listens to her anymore in the White House. The problem is the person they listen to is Laura Loomer, who is a mentally ill woman who got the director of the National Security Agency and the deputy director fired because they were in a photograph with freaking the president of the United States and the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. They're crazy and they are damaging U.S. intelligence. And you know what's going to happen? China will invade Taiwan and Donald Trump will say, oh, well, they weren't selling us chips anyway. And the world balance will change, clearly overtaking us. Pete Hegseth, who is an alcoholic, who is a drunk, Fox News Saturday host, who plays like he's a soldier, wants to cancel a frigate that the United States Navy desperately needs because it was partially designed in Italy. It's the best frigate on the planet. China's producing 10 to 15 frigates and destroyers per year. We're producing one or two. And now he wants to cancel that. It's almost like they work for the Chinese. No, they don't. They're just stupid. And China they harness all of the best knowledge, all of the best people, all of the best science, all of the best resources. And we are losing because we have a white supremacist attitude that we're the best at everything that we do. Yeah. You know what? Even before Pearl Harbor, we didn't have this dumbass idea. But we're going to wake up and we're going to find China eats our lunch.
Edward Said call it Orientalism. Lucas.
Malcolm, I was I was sitting here listening and wondering. You sort of brushed on it with your comments towards Tulsi Gabbard, um, but I wondered if you could speak to any tension or what your thoughts are with regards to the CIA, because I, the
Good
CIA
question.
answers directly to the president and military, or do they?
Technically, they answer to the director of national intelligence. John Radcliffe works for her.
Well, and I mean, I assume you worked for military intelligence agencies, and
Yeah.
is the United States, should we be putting our eggs in military intelligence baskets, or do you see problems in the CIA because of the political nature when it's under the executive branch?
Well, first off, you can't stovepipe intelligence like that. Um, there's a lot of stuff I can't talk about, but I was a black guy that spoke Arabic for 20 years. So I want you to give that a moment's thought, right? I mean, one of the largest recruiting bases of the CIA was Brigham Young University. And there are no black guys at Brigham Young, except when I was there, right? So, if you get my drift, there are military intelligence and the principal intelligence agencies all meld together under certain rubrics. And if you go and listen, I want you to go listen to the interview with Sue Gordon because we talk about this directly about the crisis of intelligence. And we both came away saying for people in the community not to leave the community. This presidency is going to be short lived. I mean, Donald Trump wears double colostomy bags. He has cankles and his anchors, which is indicative of congestive heart failure. I learned that when I was a EMT paramedic. And he could wake up tomorrow morning on an express elevator, to a very hot climate in the ether. And then we will have a new administration and a new way of seeing things. But the intelligence process does not change. The problem is when civilians just who are, by the way, we call them consumers, when the consumer does not care. Donald Trump does not care what the intelligence community produces. He wants it to be seen, he has a sort of a cartoonish television view of things. He doesn't even listen to Kelsey Gabbard now. She's out. I don't know if you've noticed her last statement. Tulsi Gabbard's last statement was about, I shit you not, releasing the Amelia Earhart files. This is the director of national intelligence. Okay? Sue Gordon wouldn't have done any stupid shit like that. She wouldn't have said a word. No one knew who Sue Gordon was till she retired because she's a spy. And she was out there doing the business of the United States, keeping people safe. Uh, we have a woman out there who now literally looks like she's hunting for 101 Dalmatians. So it's a joke. Really, it's a joke. But professionals are going to stay in their job and go listen to that stuff. It went an hour and 15 minutes. We usually interview for 45 minutes at the max. And Sue Gordon is just a national treasure.
I do want to move on to our last topic of the evening, Epstein diversions. Um,
Mm.
we have seen the Trump administration mm, almost be uh, how do you want me to call it? Have split personality disorder when it came to the Epstein files. For a while, they threatened any and everyone that wanted to get the files out, and then within what 24 hours, Trump was asking all the Republicans to vote to release all the files. Are we going to see the files and details?
Yeah, this is a good question. Um, First off, because the reason I like the title Epstein Diversion is because we may be at war in the next 2 weeks or so. Trump is, by the way, these talks that I have with Lev Parnas and Michael Cohen every Thursday, which we call Unleashed, Substack Unleashed. I call it Two Felons and a Spy because both went to prison for Donald Trump and suddenly found their integrity. And they're really great sources. They have awesome sources in the administration. They made a lot of friends. And Trump is so upset over this whole Epstein thing, it will consume his presidency. Investigations, he's talking about starting investigations against Democrats. Doesn't work like that. These documents and files name him 1,600 and I believe 83 times. The question is, in what context? There are affidavits out there, people who filed court cases. For a 13-year-old girl said he raped her. That girl, the other documentation shows she was there. Jeffrey Epstein himself said Trump was there and around, and had massages and things like that. We don't know. The problem is, I have the president of the United States has now placed more firepower off of Venezuela than there was against Iran and Yemen, except for including they have been doing B 2 bomber runs, they were doing B 1 bomber runs, B 52 bomber runs. We only do these mirror image practice runs as practice. And now we've got over 13 warships, aircraft carriers. That's almost 1,000 cruise missiles against people in flip flops. And, I mean, it's very something. I mean, Wajid, are we any good? Let's be honest. We're pretty bad against people who wear flip flops, right? We don't win wars against countries that wear flip flops. And Venezuela's is that true?
I mean, I am waiting for my citizenship. No comment.
Loss. I understand. So, did you? By the way, if you guys haven't seen the video on TikTok of the Muslim American man who talks about his mother throwing sandals at him, you don't understand the power of the flip flop, right?
It will reach you
Of
wherever
this,
you are in the house.
it, that's exactly what it turns corners and things. So, it's an amazing cultural facet, but it's true. We do not do well. Um, Trump has this thing in his head where he is attacking and threatening countries with oil resources, and now he's working with the opposition. And he thinks it like every president that does not consume intelligence properly, they think it will be easy.
Does Trump just want people to kiss the ring? I mean, like, did you see his meeting
Oh
with
yeah.
Mamdani today?
Oh yeah. Oh, he loves it. And the funny thing is, what Trump does, and I've met people that know him intimately, um, I used to be a consultant at Warner Brothers, and these guys were like, he's got a lot of charm, and when he comes in a room, he turns the charm machine on, but he's out to fuck you, right? And the people who do not tolerate that are Howard Stern, guys like that who understand that he's a bullshit artist and that he's really picking your pocket. Mamdani knows that, and Trump was like, "Oh, I came away liking this guy." You know, he thinks he also has this thing called the ritual of public humiliation. The reason that he pardoned George Santos is because now he owns George Santos. George Santos is a thief. He's a liar. He's a charlatan. He claimed he was Jewish. He claimed he was gay, claimed he was straight, claimed he was married, claimed he was Catholic, all simultaneously while stealing money. Literally stealing money. Trump pardoned him because now he owns him. And George Santos will only praise Trump. Trump thought he was going to do this bullshit on Mandami. Mandami's going to come out, and Trump will probably take credit for any positive thing that comes out of New York City. Mamdani's going to do populist things. He's going to, I mean, I think it's great making the buses free, and co-ops with food. I don't know if you guys have been to Manhattan recently, but if you see some of these corner fruit stands, which are mainly carried out by people who are of limited immigration status. It's phenomenal. More fruit and variety than I could ever imagine. And him allowing that stuff to become, to be open to, essentially corner markets and using misused places. It's phenomenal. It'll be revolutionary. And you know what? He'll be a good mayor. I think he'll be a very good mayor. My favorite part of this is somebody recently said, you can't trust him. He hates everybody. He hates Christians. He hates Jews. He hates Indians. The guy's from India. You know, his cultural heritage is Indian. People are that stupid. But I think that is fast. I think that's a fascinating experiment. I'm glad he won. I think he'll revolutionize New York City and make it a better place for the average person who has to work in that city. And if you don't see all those people out there at 4 and 5 in the morning when I go out for my walk or my run out towards Central Park, and you see these people, new immigrants, Bangladeshi taxi drivers out there working hard so that I get bagels at 6:30 in the morning, then you've never been to New York City and you shouldn't go there.
Ghislaine Maxwell.
Yikes. Yeah, she's a criminal that needs to be sent back to prison. Largest sex trafficker in U.S. history. And the only reason that she is getting these benefits is Donald Trump likes her. He's going to pardon her. And the title, Protector of Pedophiles, is going to stick to him forever. Forever. And so to the Republican Party. I don't even know where she could go in this world where she'd be safe. There are 1,000 victims and family members. And, somebody out there is going to put one in her just because so they could say that they, got Ghislaine Maxwell. This is horrible. But trust me, Trump works on that. He wants to own her as an asset and to keep her mouth shut. She was convicted for perjury. She was convicted, which is lying, and she was convicted for child rape. And that's this whole subject, by the way, people. Child rape, not just pedophile. Pedophile is a nice way of putting it. The accusation on the table is that Donald Trump and may have been aware or involved in child rape.
That's crazy. And the interesting thing is that BS visiting, and BS has very
Mhm.
special ties with Ghislaine Maxwell and with
And
Jeffrey
Epstein.
Epstein. I was told that Jeffrey Epstein had a Saudi passport. Have you heard anything about that?
No, I hadn't heard that. That's interesting. So more is going to come out, and what you're going to find out is simply this: something that I've known long ago. When you have enough money, you can buy whatever you want, and it's always been that way. And you can get away with crazy shit, right? Elon Musk Grok. We're on a Elon Musk platform. Grok is now claiming that that gas chambers weren't used to kill people. You know, the world is a changing place, and if you have enough money, you can rape children. The question is, will the rest of us put up with it? And I think Donald Trump and those people, I don't care who it is, by the way. A lot of people say, oh, you're a Democrat. I'm a Democrat now, but I was a conservative Republican, Colin Powell style Republican for many years. And I don't care who's on that list. Somebody trafficked those children to other people. And the real argument that's happening here is people are not interested. Cash Patel and Pam Bondi both said they are not interested in the people who were trafficking the girls and taking and having sex with them.
Which is
That was the
insane.
secret deal. Mhm.
It's insane to hear that coming from a U.S. official.
I know. I know. It's insane. But we are in an insane world. There was a joke recently. A friend of mine said, she goes, Cash Patel, Pam Bondi, Pete Hegseth, they would all have made like really entertaining, crazy spokesmen for those agencies, but they should never have been allowed near the levers of power. Pam Bondi has been covering up for Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeff Epstein for years. By the way, do you know Donald Trump met her when she was in university? Not even law school. University as part of these, the pageant world.
Wow.
So it's a very convoluted world, but it is going to become a divert. Whatever happens next will be a diversion over to keep this flare up over veterans. See how quickly Trump jumped on that. He desperately wants to talk about anything other than the fact that he could be found out. Let's take one more question. I know we've gone almost 2.5 hours, and I've got to. It's Friday night, and you guys all need to go have a drink.
And I am thankful for your time. I know the audience is also very thankful for you being willing to answer all these questions. One last question, and the person is asking is who do you think is the best next leader for this country? Basically, is the long
Gavin
question.
Gavin Newsom, no question.
I think.
Gavin Newsom, and I got to tell you something. I am enjoying. Look, from a psychological operations perspective, or MISO as we call it now, right? Military influence operations. I am enjoying his trolling of Trump using Trump's own styles. And, nothing upsets Trump more than seeing a picture of Gavin Newsom with a 12 pack, abdomens and shirtless. Newsom can actually take his shirt off and look like that. But more importantly, he understands the threat to democracy that Trump and MAGA presents, and the threat. I'm sorry to say it, to the reality that we all live in. Those people live in an alternate reality where they are all rock stars and all one step away from being millionaires, and that Trump personally loves them, despite the fact that they're emptying their wallet for him. They just had a fundraiser the other day. There's a guy who just got 3 billion in crypto illegally, by the way. I suspect that if Gavin Newsom comes at this hard and fast, California just became the fourth largest economy in the world 2 weeks ago, past Germany. Right?
Wow.
If for those of you who haven't been to California, the quality of life is off the charts. If you're near the ocean, it is really good quality of life in California. I love being in California. Some of the best times that I had when I was in the military. I was stationed in Coronado Island, right? It was awesome. California's great. Taxes are a little bit higher, but it's like being in Switzerland with an awesome ocean. But now the fourth largest economy in the world. California literally brings in all of the revenue for 28 other poor MAGA red states. They support them. So MAGA is on welfare that California sends them. So, which is why Trump hates Gavin Newsom. Uh, you know, and could you even imagine for 1 second JD Vance going up against Gavin Newsom? He'd have to start pumping steroids for the next 2 years. Just not going to happen. Newsom could be the next FDR. Newsom could be the next FDR. And what he needs to do is start talking like it. And he has. One of his latest speeches where he was like, a podcast interview, he goes, man, this country's in desperate situation. And I'm not going to allow this to go on. Certainly not in my state. If he brings that message out there and says, hey, I will get your groceries down because I've shopped in a grocery store Donald Trump has never set foot in a grocery in his life. At age 6 months, his father was dumping $200,000 into a savings account every year. He's literally Richie Rich, the poor little rich boy.
Poor guy wasn't as rich as a Saudi prince. Uh,
No, yeah, well, that's true because they're technically trillionaires.
yeah,
And yeah, all right, let's call it a night. We're gonna have this again,
let's do it.
and I really enjoyed this, Wedgie.
I appreciate you taking the time. I think the region is going to be is unstable, and there's a lot of things happening. We will be analyzing the situation with the upcoming years. I really
Yeah.
appreciate you taking the time. I appreciate all the listeners. Uh,
Well, thank you. We definitely need to have a Gaza talk
oh yeah,
because this plans that are going for Gaza. I'm a big two-state guy. Now we're talking crazy talk, and that's going to require a few hours of discussion on our own.
that's a whole different topic. Yes.
All right.
Please
Well,
follow
thank you,
Malcolm.
everybody. Okay, thanks for coming, guys.
Yep. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being
All right.
here. Follow Malcolm, like the space, and share it with your friends. The information that was shared today is actually very important. We analyzed the Saudi American security deal. We looked over the Trump illegal orders that he gave get for the execution of military members. And last but not least, we covered the diversions of the Epstein file. Appreciate you for coming in. I'll see you later. Have a good one.